agree with you that this is a very challenging subject to discuss. It's very complex, very controversial, but we'll endeavor to make sure that the discussion isn't too convoluted.
And of course, it goes against what most people think of as common sense.
More than that, I think that, it has deeply disturbing sociopolitical implications, and I think for that reason, people have been guided to not think about this subject and to develop a subconscious resistance to it.
Well, let's begin with defining just exactly what we mean by a breakaway civilization.
Well, the ufologist Richard Dolan has coined this term. He wrote a series of books called UFOs and the National Security State. And from the title of that book series alone, you can see that what he's getting at is the possibility that the UFO phenomenon is somehow connected to the U.S. military-industrial complex, and not just in terms of the latter covering up the UFO phenomenon, but potentially fielding the UFO phenomenon. So Dolan speculates that it's possible certain scientific and technological breakthroughs have led to a culture so different from the public culture amongst elites operating in the black world, that this culture could really be properly characterized as a breakaway civilization. The people operating in terms of this worldview, who've internalized it and who are pursuing projects on the basis of it, really live in an alternate civilization, and one that's forked off of our own. And their technological advancements have also allowed them to develop a relatively independent economic and industrial base. The concept of the breakaway civilization, and Dolan proposes it as an alternative theory for the UFO phenomenon, not necessarily claiming that all UFOs are explainable in these terms, not necessarily asserting that there are no alien civilizations contacting the Earth, but that at least some subset of UFOs are advanced aerospace vehicles that are being manufactured by what at this point is not just a covert military-industrial complex, but an entire civilization that is operating from underground, as it were.
Well, we now know for a certainty that the U.S. Navy has acknowledged sightings in the last decade of vehicles tracked on radar, spotted by pilots, captured on video that far exceed the technological capabilities of the Navy, Army, and Air Force as it presently is constituted.
Yes, of course. I mean, the evidence for UFOs is overwhelming, and frankly, it has been for decades. But the question is, why the secrecy? Is it because an alien presence on this planet is being covered up? Or is it because highly classified and compartmentalized projects inside the U.S. military-industrial complex are actually developing these technologies? And you know, some of what's being seen by the Navy, these tic-tac UFOs and so forth, might actually be manufactured by deep black projects that, you know, the captains or admirals that are interacting with these craft have no idea about, because they're not cleared classification-wise to have access to those projects. Well, the accounts from the airship flap in 1897 are that, you know, these guys would land on farms, and they were people. They were, you know, human pilots dressed fairly normally, and they would ask to be resupplied certain basic goods that they needed, and in exchange they would sometimes offer to take the farmers on rides with them. One Texan farmer was offered a ride to South America and back at an unbelievable speed. Another farmer who was astounded by this contraption and asked who had produced it was told that it was being funded by New York investors, and that the company manufacturing these airships would soon be publicly declared on the New York Stock Exchange. Of the arrows, this is what they called them, the arrows that they were building. And these drawings they're really peculiar and interesting. it's clear these things are not Zeppelins. They are not early airships. They're not balloons of any kind. They are, flying with some kind of electrogravitic technology that we don't understand. Which is interesting insofar as it connects to Tesla's idea that there is an ether. I mean, Tesla's world wireless system has been dismissed by many mainstream engineers because it's based on an alternative physics concept of a dynamic ether. And it may be that whoever was designing these airships was working based on the same alternative physics model.
And the notion of ether is pretty much discredited in modern theoretical physics today, but for benefit of viewers, I did do an interview with biophysicist Dr. Beverly Rubik, suggesting that we really need to revive the concept of ether, or to say that it's already been revived in other forms. I'm going to link to that video now for people who might want to pursue that lead.
Well, in the 1800s, one of the terms for this etheric energy was vril. Which comes from a popular, or at least subculturally popular, cult classic sci-fi novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race.
Bulwer Lytton was an occultist. He also wrote the classic novel The Last Days of Pompeii.
Mm-hmm. And Bulwer Lytton described this subterranean civilization, essentially an ancient breakaway civilization that was organized around this energy, this etheric energy. And this idea of Vril and of a society organized around Vril was the inspiration to Baron Rudolf von Sebottendorf when he founded the Thule Society in Germany in 1917. And the Thule Society in Germany was the cradle for the German National Socialist Workers' Party. It was set up as a political action front against the rise of communism in Germany. These aristocrats, like Baron Sebottendorf, feared, for obvious reasons, the rise of communism in Germany. After all, Germany was the ideological cradle of communism. Project Kronos, that was set up in a think tank on the outskirts of Prague under the direction of Hans Kammler in the early 1940s. And it was an attempt to access an unlimited source of energy, to tap essentially the ether and use it for practical purposes.
I might mention again, parenthetically, that we've discussed this Project Kronos in a prior interview on time travel. There's a connection there.
Right. I mean, the name of the project suggests that, even if this was an attempt to tap etheric energy, that the shearing of space-time that takes place when the zero-point energy vortex is opened also affects time. All right, because space and time are a unified matrix. And so you had this bell-shaped device with two counter-rotating drums inside of it, filled with mercury thorium isotope, and running on alternating current and periodically shocked by direct current. And the idea is that the electromagnetic stresses that the serum was subjected to would result in a kind of alchemical transformation of this serum on a quantum level into a vortex, into a supermassive, sort of like a controlled black hole that's military, industrial, and scientific, developing as early as the late 19th century and ultimately yielding the German military-industrial complex of the 1940s. Mm-hmm. And then that was harvested in 1945 by the United States. So, Operation Paperclip imported thousands of German scientists from various fields, not just rocket science, into the United States. People as prominent as Wernher von Braun, who was made the head of NASA and took us to the moon. You have CIA directors like George Herbert Walker Bush, whose father, Prescott Bush, was one of Hitler's chief financiers in America.
Now, in addition to that, I have to trust that this information is accurate. We haven't reviewed all of your sources. As I recall, Prescott Bush was a senator.
Yes, so he was also a businessman who was responsible for funneling funding from organizations like the German-American Bund to the Nazis, to basically, concentrating and funneling support from America for the rise of fascism in Europe.
Well, I know there was a lot of support in the United States for the Nazi regime prior to the onset of America entering the war.
The military-industrial complex of the United States may be responsible for the UFO phenomenon. You have to really ask yourself whether that's the United States or whether it's American in any coherent sense. I think what happened here was a complex psychological warfare operation. And I want to add another piece of the puzzle here that has to do with the first sightings of flying saucers in 1947, which I think was frankly the catalyst for the National Security Act of 1947. A lot of UFO researchers agree with that the wave of UFOs in 1947 is what ultimately allowed the National Security Act to be passed and, the constitutional structure of the United States to be fundamentally compromised. Double-headed beast, a kind of hydra that is attacking America from two directions, both from the inside through the Nazis that have been imported and from the outside through an apparent alien threat, resulting in the creation of this highly classified, deeply underground military-industrial intelligence complex, which eventually yields a breakaway civilization, but one that's motivated by a fascist ethos and one that can't in any legitimate way be described as American, and certainly isn't under the democratic control of the American government.